If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the most paranormal event you've experienced? And, now for the story that nobody ever believes, but whatever. At least I can't feel people staring at me like I'm an idiot. When I was a kid, I was taking a bath and some lady in a black dress came in and started talking to me. Red hair, very pretty. It freaked me out because I didn't recognize her, but she was nice. Kept complimenting my toys and being very insistent that I be careful in the water. Then, she was just gone. When I told my mom, she lost her mind because she thought somebody broke in and was watching her daughter bathe. Didn't matter how many times I said that she blinked out of existence, she didn't believe me. I mean, who would? Then, she told my aunt. We were living in the house they both grew up in after my grandmother died, and when my mom made mention of the red-haired lady in black, my aunt went pale. She once saw her in her room when she was a teenager. A friend and I were driving up a mountain road to a camping site to join a bunch of our other friends at night. We were sure we were on the right road, and we knew how long the drive should be, but the drive just seemed to be taking forever. So long that we started to question if we'd somehow gotten turned around. We both started feeling uneasy, though at first neither of us voiced this to the other. We kept passing owls in the trees along the side of the road. I mean dozens and dozens of owls. I've spent a lot of time in the mountains and I'd think it was lucky to see one, but we saw dozens. All in the trees on the side of the road, staring at us. When my friend had to stop to take a piss, both of us pretty much blurted out how unsettled we were and how this didn't feel right at all, and neither of us wanted him stepping away from the vehicle. He stopped as fast as he could and pretty much pissed right out of the door with the vehicle running and the lights on, then took off again like it was some sort of race. Then we got there. Everyone wondered how we were so late. We did too. We told my father about it later and he commented on how, supposedly, alien abductees often remember seeing owls. I'd swear to the end of my days that I don't remember a single break in my consciousness on that trip, but I have no idea how it took us so long, and can't describe just how wrong the feel of everything was. I've had bears walk by 20 feet in front of me, elk wake me up brushing past my tent in the middle of the night. But felt nothing like that before or since. When I was younger, I lived with my aunt, uncle and grandmother with my little brother. One night my aunt and uncle were gone and my grandmother was in her room next to my room. My brother was asleep on the bottom bunk of our bed, and I woke up out of the blue. When I sat up, I saw an older woman staring at my brother from the corner of the room. Thinking this was my grandmother, I called out to her only to hear her respond from the other room. As I called out to her though, this woman looked up from the locked stare she had on my brother and I could feel her stare at me. It was absolutely terrifying. I banged on the wall and my grandmother yelled back that she was coming. She was the figure in the corner bringing her hand up to tell me to be quiet with one finger over her lip. We literally didn't break eye contact. When I yelled again, she ran one finger across, rather immobile at the time, so it took her a few minutes to get to me. But during this time I remember her neck while shaking her head no, and the look on her face was of disappointment. Just as my grandmother turned the corner, I looked over at her and then looked back to the corner and the figure was gone. I was only 10 years old at the time, but I have dreams every now and then. I'm 22 now, about that night. I've been a believer in ghosts since. I've never believed paranormal events, entities, etc. About a year ago I was at my parents' ranch around midnight. They were out of town for a month, so I was just hanging out there. The ranch is surrounded by woods and there are no other houses nearby. I got bored and started exploring the woods with a flashlight, and I swear to God I heard a woman singing a lullaby. I froze in horror, and after about 20 seconds of debating whether I should investigate, I ran back to the house and tried to settle down. To this day I have no clue as to what I heard. About 10 months ago I sailed from Fiji to Hawaii. I had never sailed previously but went along with two very experienced gentlemen. Every night we took shifts tending the sails, keeping an eye on the radar, etc. Being the least experienced, I always had the earliest shift, 6 to 10 p.m. On this particular night, the seas were quite intense as a result of the howling winds. I'm talking 15 feet seas and 20-knot winds in a 40 sailboat. After getting headed and backfilling the sails, spinning the boat out twice, I was feeling overwhelmed. Thankfully I had a downloaded Spotify playlist full of classical music to listen to on nights like these as a way to remain calm. The juxtaposition of intense weather and classical music was soothing and reminded me of the Disney movie Fantasia. So I throw my headphones in and tap play. Several songs in comes Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. I'm familiar with this song primarily because of my grandmother, a classical music aficionado and critic for the local paper, who had passed a couple of years ago. Needless to say, the song made me feel great as it reminded me of her. While sailing along in the pitch black through rough seas and staring at the full moon and stars, I began to notice something. The clouds and moon were interacting in time with the song. Every time the song would crescendo or decrescendo, the clouds would uncover or cover the moon, respectively. I just broke down into tears and smiled ear to ear. It had to be my grandmother. The cadence of the interaction became so predictable, in fact, that I was able to count down to the moment the clouds would shift, all in perfect time with the song. This continued until the song ended, when the clouds covered the moon and kept it covered for the last 2 hours of my shift. I'm not a religious person, but this experience shook me to my core. I have no idea what happened out there, but I feel like my grandmother spoke to me and let me know that just like her, everything would be alright. I have a few unexplainable stories that happened in my family when I was younger. My family is Hispanic/Latin in origin, so we believe in the paranormal. When I was younger, one of my brothers, not the one in the story, and my mother would practice Santeria, so there were a bunch of incidents I remember pretty vividly. Once I was staying at my older brother's apartment and I was alone watching my nephew. I had just put him down for a nap, so I went to take a quick shower. When I go out, the oven flame was on and 2 cabinet doors were open. I didn't remember doing those things, so I turned off the burner, dismissed it and went to play some PlayStation. While I was playing, I kept getting that feeling of someone in the room. Not sure if anyone else feels this, but when someone walks into a room, Teresa, feeling of someone else, like their energy/aura. It was constant. I would turn around and nothing would be there. I kept on playing and then it would come back. About 30 minutes of this and I decided to call my brother and see how far from home he was. I went back to play and something fell off the shelf in his pantry. Can't remember what it was, but it was not round. Bag of flour or sugar or something. This really freaked me out, so I brought my nephew back to the living room and put him in a car seat. A little while later my brother came home, and when he opened the front door, located in the living room, I spun around and he saw that I was uneasy. He asked about it, and after I told him everything, he decided to take me and my nephew and stay at my mom's house. When we got to my house, he noticed he forgot diapers, so he went back to get them. I wasn't there for this part, so I can only recall what he said. He walked inside and it felt cool, like colder than it should have been. He went to turn the light on and the bulb shorted out. So he quickly went to the room using the hall light, and as he crossed the threshold to the baby's room, he felt a sting on his leg. When he came back, he was visibly shaken and lifted his pants. He had scratches across his shin. But not like something poking out scratches, it was 4 separate lines slightly offset like from a hand. It went from shin to calf muscle. He wound up staying with us for a week and got a priest from our church to come and do a blessing in the house over a few days. It turns out his wife and my other brother, Santeria practicer, had played with a Ouija board in the house while they were drinking one night and were talking to someone. A friend of mine went into theology to become a pastor. He's significantly older, but stayed on dorm with us and was honestly one of the nicest and kindest guys I knew. Truly inspiring guy. He told of how he decided to become a pastor. He didn't care about life and was deep into drugs, lots of drugs and wild sex and other generally carnal things. He was throwing his life away and he knew it, but there was no consideration for recourse. He discussed how at his previous school, he woke up one night and saw grotesque creatures lines around his bed. He just said they were monsters and they sounded Lovecraftian in description. But he mentioned how a well-dressed man spoke to him, but he didn't hear words, just static type noises. Then the guy passed through his bed, and as he moved through him he passed out. Not even an hour later he wakes up with his roommate and the RA and the ARLC on duty in his room. Roommate is hysterical and says he wants to switch rooms. When the roommate sees my friend was up, he says very seriously, "I don't know what you're doing, but you need to stop. Because those things I saw weren't natural." My friend, realizing that it was more than just a nightmare, says he quit his old lifestyle that very moment. I don't really feel inspired by religious conversion testimonies, but that was the only one that actually felt impactful. I used to tease my girlfriend a bit and told her that whenever I drove out of her driveway, I could see a little old lady looking outside from her bedroom window. I told her that the house being old and in a low-cost area, there's every chance that old pensioners lived in these houses and died, perhaps even in the exact same place that my girlfriend was sleeping. She said that she didn't believe me, however I could sense a hint of doubt since I was so adamant about it. Anyways, we have since moved out and I purchased her a picture of her old house and I framed it. I photoshopped a picture of the lady looking through the window, hoping that one day she will notice it. I'm a night manager in fast food. I've told the story about what I've seen on the cameras before. It's after close, just the closers and I'm in the office counting down the drawers/safe and keeping an eye on the monitor with all the camera feeds. I see someone take off at a sprint in the area nearest the office. at a path that would have led them straight there, but nobody came in. Nobody but the closers, who were cleaning, and myself, who was in the office, was anywhere on any of the cameras. I have a new one that might not be paranormal, but I seriously hope it is because of how terrifying it is otherwise. I'm a young woman living on the bottom floor of an apartment building. The way my complex is built, the bottom floor is a bit underground, the parking lot is just below eye level if I look out the window. When I first moved in, I would sleep with the blinds open because I worked in the evenings and liked to wake up naturally to the rising sun. I'm woken up in the middle of the night by a noise at my window, and when I put my glasses on and look, there's a human-shaped figure kneeling there, framed by the light in the parking lot. It's too dark to make anything out about it, but I remember something being there. After a few seconds, it moved out of view and left. I double-checked that all my doors and windows were locked, closed my blinds, and went back to sleep. I haven't opened my blinds at night since. After my grandmother died, I heard shit in my bedroom for a couple months. Sounded like chains being dragged on a concrete floor. You could go 1 foot inside my door and hear it, and go 1 foot outside and it would be gone. Nobody would go in my room at that point, which I guess was a good thing. But it did keep me up at night. I was my grandmother's favorite grandchild, so I wasn't really too scared about it, I just wondered what it was all about. I think she was trying to warn me of things, and thus far, I still need to work on myself. If hell is a real thing, I don't want any part of it. When I was growing up, I lived in an area that had been a big Confederate camp during the Civil War. There were like 3,000 soldiers spread out over this area. My dad developed the neighborhood we lived in, and when they were doing the site work they found a lot of bullets, and buttons, and other detritus. Our house was brand new when we moved in, but built in this old camp area. All the kids in the neighborhood had weird stories about their houses. Mine was that we had this old wooden clock with a glass face that was my great-grandmother's. My mom tried to have it repaired, but it never worked. It sat on an entry table. One day I hear from upstairs like chimes. I get curious as it's just me and my cousin in the house. This is before cell phones, and she was in the back room reading a book. So I come down the stairs and that damn clock is going crazy, chiming, and the glass face is open and the damn hands are going around and around. The damn thing is shaking and getting louder and louder. I hear my cousin coming up to the front of the house and I am yelling for her to hurry up and get in here and look at this. I am staring at the clock going batshit and see her turn the corner to the entry from the corner of my, and no lie, right as she turns the corner the clock goes still and silent and the face audibly snaps closed. She was all like, "What the hell was that?" and I am freaked out and saying it was the clock. She could hear it from the back of the house, so she believed me. That house was pretty weird, but in mostly less obvious ways, like knocking on the door or getting the overwhelming feeling to get out of the house like right that second, or hearing someone call my name when I knew I was alone. Me and my sister loved to play on the Ouija board. At first we didn't believe it was real, but after playing with it for a few weeks, we decided that it was very real. We spoke to all kinds of spirits, ghosts, Anyway, this isn't even the scary part. One day we pulled the board out and began playing on it. To begin every session we would ask, "Is anyone here?" Normally it says yes, and we begin to play. But this time, it didn't say yes. It began to move in a sideways figure-8 motion. We tried again. It did the same thing. For days, this was all the board did. So I decided to go on Google and search for an answer. I found out that when the Ouija board is moving in an infinity sign, it meant that we were communicating with a powerful and evil spirit. It advised us that we close the board and not speak with it again. So naturally, my sister and I pull out the board and try speaking with it again. This time, the board was moving to all 4 corners. Very fast. Again, I went to Google. I got the same response. It was a powerful, evil spirit. And we should close the board. My sister and I continue playing with the board. This time, the planchette would move across the board and it seemed like it was trying to move off the board entirely. So I Googled what this meant. Again, it said that this spirit is powerful, and not a nice one. But it also said, whatever you do, don't let the planchette off the board. If the planchette leaves the board, this means you've let the spirit into your home. Spooky, right? So my sister and I call over my other sister to play on the board with us. And the planchette begins moving off the board. It's getting closer and closer to the edge. By this time, my sisters and I are freaking out. We are all on one side pulling the planchette in the opposite direction. But an extremely strong force was pulling it off of the board. The 3 of us are pulling the planchette as hard as we can on one side. Why we didn't just lift it up? But anyway, the planchette leaves the board. We decide to close the board and just not play on it again. A few weeks go by, nothing scary happens. One night, around 3 a.m., I was in the living room alone. I bent over to pick up the remote, and when I turn around, I saw it. A tall cloaked figure. Just standing there in the kitchen. The blood left my face and my back was so fiery. I stood there for like 30 seconds before I turned around and ran into my bedroom. The next day, my sisters and I decided to pull out the board and try to speak to the spirit. We asked if anyone was there. It said yes. We asked if it was the thing that I saw last night. It said yes. I asked it what it was doing in my kitchen. It said eating. We asked eating what? It said meat. Which was really weird. We closed the board and haven't spoke to it since. In 2008, my mother passed away from her battle with cancer. My grandmother, her mom, was still alive and I saw her almost every day. I would take her shopping, to the doctor, etc. One night I was asleep in my room and I was suddenly woken up and I saw my mom at the end of my bed. She said, "I'm okay, don't worry about me. I love you," and then she vanished. I couldn't fall back asleep for a few hours. I kept thinking I would see her again. A few days passed and I went to my grandmother's house. I was telling my grandma how I saw mom in my dreams the other night and she starts crying. I asked her what was wrong and if she saw her too, and she nodded her head. I started crying and I asked if she said anything to her. She told my grandmother the same thing. Still gives me chills thinking about it. We cried for so long. At least I know my mom is okay and to not worry. When I first returned from the war, I was a power line rigger. This was on EHV lines, extra high voltage, the kind on the top of the steel towers. Those are transmission lines, not subtransmission like most inner-city lines. So anyway, I had a job during a heavy windstorm, 2008, to go out and repair some lines near the Colorado and New Mexico border. Great pay since it was an emergency call-out, so I agreed. I meet up with my crewmen and head down, from Colorado Springs area. We get there around 9 p.m. and start getting to work. Windstorms are notorious for felling lines, but not EHV or UHV lines, since they are rigged different. When I crane up to see the broken link on the tower and inspect the damage, I remember seeing over the tops of most trees. I observed the view for a moment and saw some light nearby, from a campfire. As soon as I saw the light, I heard yelling coming from that area. It must have been about 200 to 300 yards away, but I heard a woman clearly yelling and she kept saying, "Someone please help," over and over again. I crane down and start yelling for the other guys. They heard it too and were asking questions. I told them about the campfire lights coming from the direction our trucks were facing kinda. We jumped in one of the smaller trucks, since it was 4x4, and headed down the road. We looked everywhere for the light but didn't find anything. We drove back and forth and then back again and slowed down. We rolled the windows down and stopped the truck in about the area the light would be. We all heard moaning sounds coming from the right of our truck, so to the north. It sounded like two old people who are having heart attacks. And it was really loud. So now we're on edge. The site supervisor was calling the police now and giving the general area we were at. They told us to check to see if we see anything if we felt safe. Because I had that war veteran attitude, I decided to go take a look. 2 guys came with and our supervisor stayed with the truck to wait for police. Apparently they had a station not too far, so they said 10 to 15 minutes. I armed myself with a pickaxe, and the other guys had conduit pipes. Like 1 inchers. We all started walking through the trees with our headlamps on, because it was really dark now. The moaning was still coming from ahead of us. We got through the trees and into a small clearing. Looked empty. The moaning stopped and we checked around. Nothing. We went back to the truck and as soon as we got to it we heard the woman yell again. Same thing. "Someone please help." It was just to the north where we just were. One of the guys yelled back, "Where are you?" and got no reply. Then we heard her scream in pain and nothing else. We were already running back north and the police were showing up. They must have seen us running north because 2 of them came after us. We stopped in the field area and they stopped with us and asked us what was going on. We told them. They helped us look around and we saw nothing else. We walked back to the truck and didn't hear anything else. They said they would hang out with us for a bit. We got back to work on the line and got it fitted. The police stayed parked next to each other talking while we worked. When I craned up I couldn't see any campfire light or anything. We did the job, took about an hour and a half and we were done. When we were packing our tools to head out, one of the cops left and the other came up to us. He told us that just to the west there was a small airplane that crashed and the people burned to death. He said when the police and paramedics got to the scene they were still on fire but they were gone. He told us about how 2 bodies were found away from the plane like they were crawling away from it, and 1 body was stuck in one of the windows. Said it happened in the 70s or 80s. Yeah. We packed up fast and got the duck out of there fast. So in retrospect, I never saw a fire, just light on the trees from one. I can't tell you how creepy that shit was to find out afterwards. The voices and moans were so clear. I always kind of believed in an afterlife or something, but this was truly the shit that ducked my head up. I'm so glad other people were there to experience it though. The cop believed us too, but said he didn't hear about any other reports of seeing or hearing anything in this area. This was a service road anyway, so it wasn't traveled too much. This is one that stuck with me for ages, and I can still remember every little detail. I was really young, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and I remember waking up and looking across the room to my wardrobe. There was this tall thing standing there. Like it was all dark but really tall and long. I remember that it had long arms and legs and thin spindly fingers. It didn't really have any other distinguishing features apart from the outline and 2 light eyes. I freaked the duck out when I saw it. Took me a while before I moved, cause where it was standing meant I had to walk past to get out. It didn't seem to move, so eventually I got out of bed and crept past it. Like I didn't even run, cause I was so scared to move suddenly. I remember looking up at it when I went past, but it kinda ignored me. Once I got past, I legged it straight to my mum's room. I told her about it in the morning and she seems to think she knew what it was. Don't know if it was true. My mother's family is Australian Aboriginals and we have a Dreamtime myths story of a creature called a quinkin that was meant to protect children. I'm 22 now and I will never forget that night. I know what I saw, and since then I've believed in paranormal stuff. Got my and I tickets to tour the Waverly Hills Sanatorium in KY. Claims to be the most haunted place in America. Taps and ghost hunting. Chris Angel have both done shows there. Saw several flashlights turning on and off by themselves, answering questions and coinciding with being referenced by the tour guide. They have several toy balls all over the building, and my and I were on the 3rd floor, alone at the end on the hallway, rolling the ball back and forth to each other and talking to the little boy spirit that is said to be there. Halfway between the ball rolling between us, it takes 90-degree turn and rolls into another room. We walk in and the ball is rolling/spinning in a tight circle in the center of the room, then it comes to a sudden dead stop. We saw other things that night, but those really stand out. One night I was up late watching TV in the living room. My ex-boyfriend was in the bedroom asleep. All of a sudden I hear my daughter whisper in my ear, "Mommy." She did that a lot so she wouldn't wake up my ex. So I turned around to see what she wanted, but stopped when I remembered that my children were staying the night at their grandma's. I was creeped out for the rest of the night. I believe I have witnessed a demonic possession. I have no reason to lie to internet strangers. I grew up in the South with a family who all lived in big old houses. One aunt's house was a historical landmark. It was turned into a Confederate hospital in the Civil War, and I vividly remember smelling vanilla there late at night randomly, hearing boots walk the halls when no one was awake, once even witnessing a door slam with force and no one being around, so I wasn't easily spooked. Fast forward to about 6 years ago, I'm a relatively new nurse starting work at a nursing home. There is a room no one likes to go in, an old woman who was never gotten out of bed and was diagnosed demented. The nurse training me said she's possessed, don't go in there alone. I of course laughed it off, thinking this girl is crazy. So it piqued my curiosity and I read her chart and see notes about Catholic priests coming in. Apparently the facility called in a local church who brought 4 men in who attempted to perform an exorcism for 6 hours unsuccessfully. I still didn't believe. I would go in there with her medications only once a shift, and there were pictures of saints on the walls and a rosary kept hanging above the bed. She writhed around in bed speaking incoherently and never made eye contact or responded to anything, not an uncommon sight in a nursing home. My mother and I have a rocky past. I used to feel that she viewed me as competition. I know that sounds crazy, but if you knew her it wouldn't sound so crazy. One night I enter with the medication that she never would come out of her comatose mumbling state to take a picture of the saints for my friend who was obsessed with the occult. I know it was stupid, I was only 20, and as soon as I pull out my phone the woman slowly turns her head to look at me. She says in the most wicked sounding croaking voice, "Your mother is better than you," then commenced a low laugh that I can still hear. I felt pure terror and ran out. When she was actively dying a few weeks later, I was at the end of a long hall with my medication card and noticed a woman in long green dress with a matching shawl walking down the hall. It was an unusual dress for our area, and she entered the room with the demented lady and prayed over her. The demented lady began to laugh and moan loudly, and didn't stop until she died almost 2 days later. The woman in green left the room after about 1 hour and handed me a handwritten prayer and asked me to read it as she was passing. I read it and the gist of it was, "God, please accept this damn soul," etc. I got chills. Why a little old lady? But I called her daughter in New York to tell her that her mother was actively dying. The girl said, "Good, don't call me again," and hung up the phone. So maybe she wasn't just a sweet old lady. I've never felt fear like that again. I bought a cross necklace and wear it almost every day, even though I'm even sure I believe Just the symbol makes me feel safe. So I was in my cousin's garage, and in our family it was common knowledge that our grandmother's ashes were kept in there. This didn't really bother us, we were there to play foosball. All of a sudden the lights turn out. Can't play in the dark, so we go to leave but the door won't open. Keynote here, the door locked from the side we were on and the light switch was also on our side. We tried turning on the lights and nothing. We weren't panicking, we thought maybe her brother was holding the door shut. Looked under the door and no body there. We yell for someone to open the door. And my mom comes and opens it. We told her what happened and she laughed it off, saying probably grandma since you both are named after her anyway. We didn't play foosball for a while. This story is from my parents. My aunt was killed in a car accident by a drunk driver. She was killed instantly with a laceration to her neck. It was very tough for my family since she was so young, and died so violently. Due to the extent of her injuries, morticians needed to do a lot of embalming work to make her open casket ready. The smell of embalming fluid stuck in my parents' mind. I was born 2 years later. Still a few days old, I slept in a bassinet by my parents. One morning, my parents woke in a panic because I had not woken them through the night for feeding. Leaning over to check on me, kiss my head, my mom smells a pungent and eerily familiar odor of embalming fluids on my forehead. She is convinced my aunt visited me through the night. I myself am not a religious person, nor a believer in the paranormal, but smell memories are so strong, I too would like to believe my aunt visited her newborn niece. Small aside, I find it interesting I have a tan birthmark running along my neck horizontally. I never believed in anything paranormal, but when I look back on the few years I lived in my first house, there was definitely some weird things going on there. We were the first owners of a house that had been condemned, purchased at auction, and flipped. The house had once been a whore/crack house. It was right off a set of railroad tracks, and in the 60s the trains would drop off girls from the city. The first day my husband and I moved in, we were sitting in the living room, and we were both simultaneously overwhelmed by an utter sense of dread. At the time we thought it was because our lives had just changed so fast, first home and all, but I'll never forget that feeling. It was deep in my gut, it was dark. We cried together. We'd never done anything like that before. It was intense and awful. There was this attic space that had been turned into a spare room on the 4th floor. Weird stuff happened in this room. We'd come home from work and our dog would be sitting on the 3rd floor landing, just staring up the stairs. Our dog is a gentle giant. Won't even bark at a cat. But he would growl at those stairs and scare everyone by barking at something that wasn't there. Every once in a while, I'd be sitting at my computer or reading a book in bed and the room would start shaking. It was a slight tremor, would last for about a minute, and then would go away. I once asked the neighbors if they ever felt earthquakes. They looked at me like I was crazy. This is the part that gets freaky. Every few weeks, for as long as we lived there, the smoke alarms in that spare bedroom would go off. Always at 4:15 in the morning. We replaced the batteries, the alarms, we called an electrician, nothing was wrong. In that same bedroom, there was a ceiling fan. This wasn't a cheap plastic fan. This was the kind with joints made of wrought iron. They were solid pieces. One night in the middle of the night we wake up to a loud bang from upstairs. We go and look and the ceiling fan is going about 8 times faster than it should be capable of going. Embedded in the wall over the guest bed is one of the blades of the ceiling fan. The wrought iron arm had been twisted and broke off. That fan wasn't even a year old. We put the house on the market after 2 years. And now I'm not quite as certain in my assurance that the paranormal is fiction. This was when we lived in Germany in base housing. My mom put my sister in bed one night, tucked her in, and when she got to the door to turn the light out, my sister was sitting up while fast asleep and leaning on something, almost like someone had her in their lap. Nobody was there. Mom laid her back down, tucked her back in, walked to the door, turned back, same thing. Mom took her into her, mom and dad's, room to sleep that night. Never happened again. When I was about 20 years old, I was with a group practicing for a performance in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We were a drum and bugle corps, and were practicing outside late at night. After we finished rehearsal, a group of around 5 of us had to walk from our rehearsal field to the equipment truck. Due to it being on the historical battleground sites, we had to walk quite a distance in pitch black night across one of the battlefields, because the park rangers didn't want the semi-trailer park near the landmarks. While we walked in silence across the field, at exactly the same moment, all 5 of us stopped dead in our tracks. One of the members of the group says, "Did you all just feel someone put their really cold hand firmly on your shoulder?" Just FYI, it was mid-July and hot as anything that night. No one said a word and we all started running full out the rest of the way. We took the long way back. A few years back I was working as delivery van driver. One day I was driving along, and I noticed something in the sky. It was floating a few hundred feet above the ground, and it looked to be about the size of a smart car. There was no apparent mechanism for keeping this thing airborne. It was perfectly white and spherical, bisected in the middle, with a circle on the upper half that had 3 smaller, dark circles arranged in a triangular pattern. There were no wings, no propellers, no rotors, there were no strings attached to this thing. Nothing. And it wasn't stationary, it was moving. I tried to keep my eye on this thing as best I could as I was driving, but at some point I had to take a turn. As I turned down the road, I had to see it out of my driver's side window. It had been in front of me before. As I was driving down that road, it suddenly shot up at about a 45-degree angle very quickly, hovered there for a moment, and then shot straight up and out of sight. Now, this was not in a rural area or anything. I saw this as I was driving around in the suburbs. I posted about it on my Facebook, but no one had seen it. I was wondering if there'd be anything on the news about it that evening, but there wasn't. I wish I would have taken video of it, but I doubt it would have been very good. My ex-girlfriend and I were riding in my car back to my place at around 2 a.m. The house is in a rural area in the panhandle of Florida. The road we were on comes to a Y at which we can continue straight or veer to the left to go towards my house. Immediately after taking the left, we start a short incline that takes about 5 seconds before leveling out. Soon after reaching the top of this small climb, I notice something to the left of the road. In the first split second, I think I must be seeing a panther. After all, there are panthers in this area of Florida, and although rare, sightings do occur. However, as my eyes adjust to this object, I notice that it is not a panther at all. The length, height and color of this object made me think of a panther. It is about 5 feet long, 3 feet tall, and black. I then think that it must be a cloud of smoke from an unseen fire in the woods to the left of the road. I soon dismiss that idea when I realize it is moving across the road from left to right, not leaving anything behind and moving too quickly for wind to be carrying it. It is, like I said, 5 feet long and 3 feet tall, black, and smoky in composition. In the center of the cloud it is completely opaque, you cannot see through. The edges of the cloud possess some translucence and appear to be wispy writhing tentacles of smoke all around. It moves about as fast as a sprinter as it crosses in front of us from left to right before dissipating on the right side of the road in a ditch in front of a house. The whole sighting took maybe 3 or 4 seconds. Needless to say we were both shocked, and we rode in silence for about 10 seconds before I asked her if she had seen it. She acknowledged that she had, but when I tried to start speculating she said she didn't want to talk about it. I think only once more in our relationship did I ask her about it and she remained unwilling to address it. It moved with speed, did not break up until completely disappearing at the end of its movement, and was too dark and thick in the center to be smoke from a fire. What's more, the direction it was coming from was a wooded area to the left of the road. About 10 feet more down the road from where we saw it is a perpendicular street that takes you down behind where it came from into a cemetery. It is called Crane Cemetery and there used to be a church on the grounds that I was told had burned down a couple decades ago. I rode back there a few days later on a foggy morning just to scope it out. I had a great aunt that I was very close to. My dad's mother was really abusive and her sister ended up being more like his mom as he was growing up. So my great aunt was more like my grandmother. She got sick and kind of deteriorated really quickly over a couple of months, so my dad would take turns with her real son staying nights during the week and making sure she was okay. One day I woke up and everything was fine, but as the day wore on I kept having the absolute worst chest pains. I'm 23 now but was 21 at the time and fairly healthy, so I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was at a birthday party for one of my baby cousins and kept excusing myself because the pain would leave me gasping for air mid-sentence. I left the party to try to get some rest and remember feeling really anxious and not being able to sleep. My heart started racing and I got up to get some water and suddenly felt this sense of relief. I'd been taking antacids all day and assumed the water helped them finally kick in. The next morning when I woke up I felt great. I went to my grandmother's house, on my mom's side, and was chatting with her until my dad called. He had obviously been crying and was calling to let me know that he went to my aunt's house from work that morning and found her dead in her room. She had her night clothes on and was already cold, so they knew it happened that night. EMTs or the medical examiner, whoever came to examine the body, said she died from a massive heart attack. It was the strangest thing and I've never experienced anything like it again. I full-heartedly believe in the paranormal. My current boyfriend's stepmother knew absolutely nothing about me when we met, and she described my dead brother to a T, and then proceeded to tell me things that only my dead brother would know. The house that my parents live in once belonged to my great-grandparents, and my grandfather ran a mechanic shop out of the garage. When boyfriend's stepmom visited their house for the first time, she described my great-grandfather, who kept repeating the phrase, "I left it all in there," and he kept pointing to the wall of the garage. About a year later they did some garage renovations, and it turns out my grandfather, who didn't trust banks, left a large sum of money behind a loose brick in the garage and never told anyone it was there. I've had things touch me when nobody was home. I've had dreams of my brother coming to me and telling to things were going to happen, and then they do. Every once in a while our cat will howl and freak out with his hair standing on end staring at our closet. We've had multiple psychics tell us that there is an angry spirit living in there, and none of them had any prior knowledge of the problems we've been having. Occasionally things will fly off of shelves for no reason, and you can see things moving from the corner of your eye. Most of the time I just assume it's my brother, as multiple psychics have told me that he's aware of whatever evil is following us that live in the closet, and he protects us from it. All in all, supernatural events stopped freaking me out a long time ago, and I welcome them now, assuming most of them are my brother. What I've described here is only the tip of the iceberg. I could fill books and books about the things that I've seen my boyfriend's stepmother do. It's truly amazing. I vividly remember some very creepy stuff happening in the house I lived in as a young child, aged 2 to 4. My door, which was always left open and usually held open by some sort of stopper, would spontaneously slam shut, the blinds would rattle despite the window being closed, and a shadowy face with red eyes and a sharp-toothed grin would appear in the corner above my bed, typical ghost/demon stuff. I also remember having very violent, gory dreams in that house, which was odd considering my parents didn't have cable or any movies in the house that would have been an explanation for young me having those nightmares. My brother also complained of there being creatures with sharp claws under the bed. A particular event that really stands out to me occurred shortly before I moved out. My brother had these toy cars that would play music when the wheels moved. One night, I heard the music coming from my brother's room. I was pretty mad, seeing how it was pretty late at night and I wanted to sleep, so I went to his room to confront him. When I entered, my brother was dead asleep. He can and always has been able to sleep through anything, but all of the cars were sitting on the floor with the music blasting. I cut my losses and noped the heck out. Perhaps this was all the fabrication of a child's overactive imagination, but reflecting upon the few memories I have of that house always managed to creep me out. This happened to me when I was in high school, maybe my junior year. I've grown up an avid hunter, which isn't so uncommon for girls in my hometown. My dad and I would go hunting on the property where his best friend, Mike, lived. I grew up spending lots of time out there, and Mike was like an uncle to me. One day, Mike suddenly passed away in his sleep. We kept hunting on the property with his son after that, and that year, I shot my first buck. Dad helped my field dress it and bring it out of the woods on the quad. We were standing by the truck, talking with some hunting buddies, when I decided to go look at my deer because I was so excited about it. I was the length of the truck and trailer away from everyone else when the wind slightly picked up and it felt like someone had their arm around me in a side hug. I had an overwhelming feeling that someone was proud of me. I'm still convinced it was Mike letting me know I had done well. This one I've told a lot over the years. People have said psychic vision, one person said friendly demon, one person said archangel, but whatever it was, this is what happened. There was a big earthquake in the early 90s where I lived in California, the Northridge quake. I believe the biggest one I've felt in my 31-year lifetime. I was about 6 or 7 and already an incredibly light sleeper because my sister snored like an entire family of lumberjacks sawing logs. This particular night, her snoring didn't wake me, but something caused me to sit straight up in bed. I could feel the very slight rumbling of the beginning of an earthquake. By now, we'd all been through a few earthquakes, so none of us were particularly afraid, but I knew to wake my sister up so she could get to safety. I called out, she didn't stir. I called out louder. Again, she didn't stir. It was really starting to shake, so I started to get up, but froze. There was a man at the foot of my sister's bed. As a kid, I thought he was about 10 feet tall, but now that I'm an adult and 6 feet 4 inches myself, he was probably about my height, maybe a tad bit taller. The part that hasn't changed over the years was what he looked like. He was mostly an incredibly dark blue, but with sunken and red, glowing eyes. But I wasn't scared at all. I honestly thought he looked really cool. I took my blanket off and started to get up, then the man held his hand out and shook his head. When I opened my mouth to scream for my sister, he put a finger up to his lips and shook his head again. By now the shaking was getting really bad, so I just started to get up. He held out his hand with all 5 fingers flared out. Then 4. 3. He was gone. I waited for just a moment, and right about when he would have hit zero, my sister's heavy chest of drawers toppled over right where I would have been standing. She finally woke up and my parents came in to check on us. I told them about the man and my mom said I was just scared because of the earthquake. But to this day, I remember what he looked like. A couple of years ago, a good friend of mine killed himself in his home but wasn't found for another 4 days. I was in the middle of getting kicked out of my family's home, so I didn't have any free time. None of his friends were invited to his funeral, which was out of town, so nobody really got to say their goodbyes. After 2 to 3 months, I finally worked up the courage and drove by his house where I got an eerie feeling. I started to cry until I fell asleep in my bed. That night I had a dream that I was sitting on a bench crying about my friend, when a light glared over me, like in the movie Focus, at the end. My friend appeared and sat down next to me. We had a long talk and I apologized for being an asshole as I didn't know things were that bad for him and I was extremely selfish to notice anyway. Throughout the conversation, his distinct laugh echoed in my ear. It was amazing to hear it again and it made me smile. I woke up sweating and crying and laughing all at the same time. It was all the closure I needed. It still feels like he is with me and watching out for me. My dad died in an accident at work when I was 11. He was 33. I have a few memories, but I've forgotten things like the way he talked and moved, the stuff you don't pay attention to as a kid. Anyway, when I was 19, I became pregnant. Single and living away, I moved the 30-odd miles back home and got a small flat. Around the time I was about 3 months pregnant, I had a really vivid dream. My dad and I were walking around his home village and he was telling me that no matter what happened, he'd look after me, and everything would be okay. I woke up with tears soaking my pillow. Fast forward a few weeks and I had developed preeclampsia. For those that don't know, it's a condition characterized by high blood pressure in the mother, swelling of the hands and face among other things, and it's very serious. In fact, when I introduced myself to a midwife who had looked after me at the time, she said she didn't believe I would survive. I was admitted to hospital and after having treatment to stop me having seizures, I had my baby by emergency cesarean section at 28 weeks. He was moved to a bigger hospital for surgeries, but he died after spending 5 months in the NICU. I was a mess, completely devastated. A few weeks after his burial I had another vivid dream. My dad was sat in an armchair in a cream color room with a cream fluffy rug on the floor. At his feet there was a blonde, curly-haired boy playing with toy cars. Even though I couldn't hear words, I had feelings, like he was saying, "See? We're together. I've got him. We're fine." I've not had another one since. Maybe it was my depressed, stressed out mind playing tricks, but I sincerely hope it wasn't. I'm the most sensible, skeptical person you could meet, but a little bit of me has to believe this. I used to rent a house with a couple of other people that was outside of town, kind of in between the city and a suburb. We had an acre of yard for this 1960s style ranch that the landlord's father had built when the family was selling their farm. The creepy old, empty farmhouse still stood on the back end of the property. It was all pretty far from anything and we didn't have any neighbors nearby, so we thought it was great for big parties. The house had a really large, attached garage. I think 4 cars could fit in there and the left side led down to a basement apartment that another friend lived in. One night, I thought I was home alone and heard a car start in the garage. When I'd parked in there, I was pretty sure it was empty, so I went to the garage to see if the basement housemate was there. I poked my head in the door and didn't see any car, but definitely smelled exhaust. Huh. That's weird, I thought. I went back into the house, where I saw all the cabinets in the kitchen were wide open. I flipped on the light and saw a woman's shadow move quickly through the kitchen, then disappear. I got the hell out of the house until my roommates came back home. One of them, I'll call her Jay, was friendly with the landlord's girlfriend. Jay mentioned to the girlfriend what had happened that night. The girlfriend said that was odd because her boyfriend, our landlord, had lost his dad to suicide. The landlord's mom passed away after a long battle with cancer, in Jay's bedroom, and his father was so distraught that he killed himself in the garage by hooking up a hose to the exhaust pipe in his car. Jay's room was so cold some nights that you could see your breath.